Sam Tomer. I wanted to speak about our short paper IntraDataspace, an architecture of a company internal data space. So just to speak about the project partners here, I have a background in, I'm working for Fraunhofer ISST, and we have also, as you heard Boris Otto in the morning, we are a founding member of Dataspaces here, and we have many activities around this topic, especially the contribution to the Open-Source Eclipse Dataspace Components project, EDC, which is mostly the connector, but also other tools around in dataspaces, and the contribution to the dataspace protocol, DSP. And we did this paper in collaboration with the IAV GmbH, which is an engineering company in the automobile sector. They have around 1,000 projects per year, have 7,600 employees, 26 locations. To sum up, really big company, really much data internally. And before I want to go to the point where I speak about the internal data space, I want to just a brief overview of a data space and what is important for me here in this talk. So the goal of a data space is that we want to share between different participants data on a sovereign way. So we have like core services in a data space, like registration, identity, and so on, to achieve this, but also have the participant services like a connector. And what we see outside here, like in existing data spaces, we have always data exchange on a company level, like in Catena-X, we have it between BMW and Bosch, we have Gaia-X with the IED and so on, which all is run out, but we look later onto the company level and see what participants could be there. Then a really big problem which is Dataspace is tackling is the problem of trust in a data space. Like also already before mentioning is that the BMW, Mercedes don't trust each other. That's why they use data spaces. So we have like a concept of decentralized identity, trust issues and so on to establish trust in a data space. And going the way to a decentralized way like SSI. And we have different policies in our data space. So we have two levels, access policy and usage policy. The idea of access policy is here that as a participant I can say that nobody in the data space are allowed to know or is allowed to know that I own a data asset. So there could be a policy saying he is allowed to see it or not. And we have usage policy, which is describing how the data set is being handled. Deleted after 30 days, just in EU, that's everything what everybody hears in the data space concept. Now we had a talk with the IAV, which I said is a really big company, and they have a sick of data. And this sick of data is coming from many different projects who are isolated by themselves. And this knowledge is not managed by humans. So what I mean by that is, if I'm an employee in project A, I don't know what data sets exist in project C, and nobody in the company will know that. So there was, if one project had, for example, some data would be needed by project D, they did it again because they didn't know they already had the data. And we had a discussion with the IAV because we are in this topic of data spaces, if there's an aspect of getting this data space concepts down to an internal data space where we just try out because they already tried solutions like data lakes and so on. They didn't work out directly and we tried it out in a concept here. And we come to the solution that we map our identities we had before in participants on the company level, here now on the project level. So identity in our intra-data space would be now that project A is an own connector, project C is an own connector, and so on. We can then have a data space about now the different projects. Why we chose the projects? Firstly, because the data is assigned to the project, so the project is the data owner here, and also the contracts and the regulations are mapped to the different projects. So, for example, customer of the project A says you are not allowed to share the data. Project partner B says you are allowed to do it with these different customers also to share it, because in the automobile sector you have like Audi, BMW, they have like child firms. that's why they allow it to use it for different partners, but not Audi does not allow to use the data with BMW, for example. That's where we get our usage policies here. So our goal was, as I said, to use the dataspace principle just for testing, if it's mapping or not, and to use technologies that are outside. Specifically here, we chose the Eclipse Dataspace Components of 2 reasons, because we are a contributor to this project. So we already have a big knowledge about how these components are working and can see the limits or not limits of these tools. We wanted to integrate the existing IT infrastructure of the ERV as most as possible. And we wanted to create a user experience that the user can just log in, get easy knowledge about what data sets exist in the different projects or not. So we increase the data discoverability for the employee. So if we are looking now on the overall concept architecture here, we have on the top side tools who have nothing to do really with dataspace technologies. We use the IAM solution of the ERV, which hopefully has the data of the employees, so every employee, so he can log into an application with this information. This IAM system should have the information about which employee is mapped to which project, so an employee can just handle an authorization of the project, and also in project there are roles like project lead, just developer, and so on. So we have different decisions. We also took the issue tracking system of a company, so we get an automatically auditing of choices. So one example could be that there's no automatic way of deciding that a usage policy is accepted or not. Then we could say that the usage policy is the project lead of project X has to decide if this data can be shared or not. Then we push in an issue in the issue tracking system. He decides can be shared, can be not be shared. When we have an audit on this decision automatically, and the system can run again. What's the core concept on our architecture is the control center, which should be a web-based application where you see you are logging in, assigned to your project because of the IMM, can choose the different data sets existing in the IntraDataspace, and this information you are getting from a catalog. This catalog is based as a central catalog against the ideas of dataspaces because of performance reasons. Because as I said, we have around 1,000 per project per year mapped to each connector. So if we do every 15 minutes a scrape of every data set, we have to request thousands of connectors every time, and we thought of performance issues that we don't want to do it. So what we do is, if you have a data asset, you put it in the data catalog, the central catalog, and then it being distributed to the corresponding connector. So what we are losing here now is, as I said, we have policies on access and usage policy. We completely lose the access policy here because the connector can't decide if he's sharing the data set or not. But we had discussion with the ERV here about, and they said that an employee of a company is allowed to know the existence of every data set in the whole ERV. So that's why we don't need to tackle this problem. Now, if we have an employee for project C as consumer wanting some data, then he is just now making a normal contract negotiation, as hopefully everybody knows of the EDC components here. I didn't ask yet. Does anybody nothing know about EDC? Okay, EDC is a technical framework where you have the data space is an example implementation of it. And you have 2 phases if you want an asset. You have a contract negotiation, deciding if a policy is, if a data transfer is allowed. And after this accepted, if the negotiation is accepted, then you go to the next step to transfer your data. And then you see we do a contract negotiation between the control planes, again, following the normal standard of dataspace protocol. And then we just can use the data plane concept of the EDC again for proprietary data. So what does it mean? The EDC says it's so modular that you can transfer every data you want, but you have to implement it by yourself. So you're just getting the trigger by the control plane to the data plane, hey, start your transfer. And if you have something proprietary like PostgreSQL or so, which is not existing here, then you have to implement it. That could ERV do. Or we have the standard like a file transfer or so that's also already existing in the EDC Cosmos. What we now see is that we don't look into trust, because also we had the concept that we before said in dataspace companies mistrust each other, so we need a neutral instance, like a dataspace governance, trust issue and so on, so that they trust each other and make data sharing. But in the company internal dataspace, we don't have the problem, because every project is inheriting from the same legal entity. And if they don't trust each other, they have another problem than just sharing data. Then to sum up, this architecture is, again, we try to use the existing ERM, so we don't have the need to duplicate information about participants, credentials, and so on. The identity of a connector is now mapped down from a company to a project, and then that we use the centralized data catalog just pure out of performance reasons, and that we lose the access policy, and that we think that in an IntraDataspace, the trust between each participant in this IntraDataspace is being existing by nature. What is here the problem, if we have the next steps to tackle here, is in our architecture that we have a really bad scaling problem, because we map every project to a connector. So if we have in 1 year 1,000 connectors, and again next 1,000 and so on, after 5 years we have 5,000 of connectors, you don't want that, because you don't share every time to with every project your data. So 2 ideas we have right in mind is, one, that we have a multi-tenancy connector, so we can log in as different projects here, can use the connector and just use the policy enforcement and so on of the connector, just on the who is right now logged into the connector. Or the second one would be a deployment choice, that we get it done that the connector is scaled by 0, so we can have a really reactive connector who is scaling up in milliseconds, and we just can sleep him, put him up again. Another topic we had with ERV was speaking about the idea, now we have the internal dataspace, all the assets being defined. Now the next step would be that we come out with all the assets and say what data what we share with external companies now. We don't want to duplicate again our data assets and so on. Just reuse what we have internally and share it with outside companies, like a normal dataspace like Catenax. Yeah, that was all of the spec.
Or MES system, other system.
How to communicate?
Yes.
As the concept of the EDC makes not a schlanken Fuß, but it says this data plans are like have an protocol, but the protocol is not about how you transfer data, it's about like triggering a transfer after a successful contract negotiation. So this extensions, data plans, you can implement by yourself. So the EDC is like a modular case. It's not like a ready software. You have always to put in some work by your own. This is done because there are so many different industries there out. With everybody has their own like flavor and solutions, and you can't prepare for everybody every solution. So they decided in a way so everybody can implement their own solution in it, and then transfer the data the way.
Stupid question. So, what is the main benefit of this approach to the traditional enterprise content management approach?
and the idea was that we can translate the contracts of each project into usage policies, and then can automatically use the policy enforcement of these connectors. So a connector can decide, already has a policy engine who is saying you are allowed to share to transfer data now or not. So we don't have to implement that by themselves, and we get also the favor of these data plans, the modularization, because then we can also get the benefit of transferring data, because they had some proprietary systems established by themselves. So they also get this favor of they can transfer it with the connector directly.
Yeah, I would be interested, you know, you have a lot of discussion about getting access to data from the perspective of individual projects, but can you run research functions or knowledge sharing function across the different projects without getting direct access to the data and knowing the data?
And it's about that's the catalog problem then. We have to, then that was not the discussion we had, because we were not like, we wanted to make also data mesh with them, so we get a clean data governance by them. That would be what you mean, that we get all the information in the step before, I think. But we had not the option to tackle this problem. But I think there is that we need really good meta information to get this data. And we discussed with them that also this needs to be automated in some place, but we could not tackle this problem in this project with them, because we not got the option to discuss it.
In principle, you know, I mean, you have a question or you want to know something, you make research, so you find out that in this project the issue has been tackled one way or another.
Yeah, exactly.
So
and
then, you know, if you know that within that project could be interesting, you know, and then you go to the project and request access. But without knowing anything about the project, how would you know what knowledge is in the project?
Your question is, I think, too deep for the industry, because they have problems before this step. They don't even know that they did the same car already in some other project.
Exactly.
Yeah, and if you have the metadata about, like, you have an car XY tested, then they just search for car XY, then they already got the benefit already and don't need exactly what data there is. And this helps them a lot, because on project level they got, like, they knew that there was data just because personal contact, randomness, and not about, like, ways of how communicating on data structure in their own company, and that's why it already helps this approach. But yeah, you are right. You should go deeper into it.